us yet?
Yep.
Oh,
So
okay.
we are live now.
I better not say anything. So they saw me combing my hair. Great.
I will go ahead and jump in and say good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And welcome to another in our series of LPL Seed Library Presents programs. The LPL Seed Library, if you don't know, is a program where we loan open pollinated crop seeds and native seeds and do education around plants and their role in our lives, nature and its intersections with culture. We're very pleased to welcome back acclaimed writer, lepidopterist, and good friend of the library, Robert Michael Pyle. Bob is the founder of the Xerces Society and the author of several significant field guides for North American and Northwestern butterflies, as well as 20 other books of natural history, fiction, and poetry. Recent books include Tidewater Reach, a collaboration with photographer Judy Vandermaten that we had a program about some months back, and the wonderful Nature Matrix, new and selected essays. He lives and watches butterflies in Grays River, Washington, and we're very honored to have him here today. Before I turn it over, I want to remind you that you can ask questions. Feel free to ask questions in the chat function or the Q&A, and we'll keep an eye on those. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thank you very much, Chris. Happy to be here. I'm so excited about the Longview Public Library Seed Library. I wasn't aware of seed libraries until recently. What a wonderful thing. What a wonderful way to get seeds out in the world for your own pleasure and for the butterflies and other pollinators. Mm-hmm. Also, a way to know that the seeds you're planting have not been treated with neonicotinoids and other pesticides. Mm-hmm. So congratulations on that good work. And thank you to you and your colleagues for having me back again for another Longview Public Library function. Very, very happy to be here. It was fun to be there for the Tidewater Reach. People don't know that book is published by our wonderful local publishers, the Columbia River Reader, started a press, Columbia River Reader Press, who published the Tidewater Reach, and now they've got another whole line of books going. Chris, I want to share with you some good news that the Nature Matrix, since we talked about it, was a finalist for the PEN America Award in the Art of the Essay. So that was a happy milestone, and I'm very much hoping that'll help that book to get out in front of people. But what helps most are the libraries and the independent booksellers and the readers. As Barry Lopez once said, it's a community of readers in service to writers, or maybe it was writers in service to readers. But the libraries and the independent booksellers are in service to us all. So let's all support them, please. Just remember, Jeff Bezos doesn't need your money for another rocket ship, but the independent bookstores do. So please favor them. Now, I'm going to stay small like this until the end, when I will come up and be a looming presence and answer questions and converse with people. Welcome to you all. It's near the end of the butterfly season, but it's not here yet. In fact, sun has just shone into my studio here. So I think the skippers will be flying unless the rain did for them last night. I'm going to start right in on the butterflies of the Cowlitz Columbia. We're talking about the area here. And by the way, does my cursor work for a pointer? Can you see my cursor moving around? Mm-hmm. Oh, how handy. That's good. So we're talking about the area of Longview, Kelso, and surrounds here in Castle Rock and on out to Grays River. I'm speaking to you from right about here in Grays River. These are the Willapa Hills. And Longview and Kelso nestle at the base of the Willapa Hills and the Southern Cascades. Now, this is an area where the rivers come together. The Toutle comes down, of course, with all of its ash load. The Cowlitz comes on down here off the glacier and on Mount Rainier and on down debouches into the Columbia right here, where many of you are, although I know we have people from all over the world today. But this is where we're talking about. This is Oregon. This is Washington. The Columbia River is the border here. And right at the Great Bend is where the Longview Public Library is located, right about here. Now, this area is not exactly butterfly central. It's situated well for butterfly distribution because of the rivers that come together, because butterflies follow rivers, both in long-term migrations of the few species that do that, but also in their day-to-day movements, and they're always pushing to get their ranges a little bit bigger. However, we're in a relatively rainy area, arid compared to me. Out here in Grays River, we get about 10 feet of rain a year, about 120 inches. Here you're relatively arid. What do you get, about 60 or so in Longview, I think, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the real arid country of Seattle and Portland down in the 30s. But butterflies are not terribly well adapted for a lot of rainfall unless it's warm. Butterflies do well where it's hot and wet, like the tropical rainforests, and where it's hot and dry, like the deserts, and where it's cold and dry, like the Arctic. But they don't do very well where it is both cool and wet. And so we're on the edge of the rainforest with heavy forest cover for the most part. And so we're not in the best butterfly country. If you want more butterfly diversity in Washington, you go on up to the Olympics, especially the northeast slopes in the rain shadow, or to the eastern canyons all along the east side of the Cascades are superb butterfly country. And in the west sides up in the higher country, and then the alpine parts of the volcanoes, not so much Mount St. Helens now, although some species have come back there strongly. We're over into the Columbia Basin in the springtime. And even parts of the Puget Trough are quite diverse for butterflies because of their post-glacial prairies. However, we do have a number of species that are well adapted here, and they're the ones I'm going to be talking about today. Now, Longview is located right here at the intersection of the Puget Trough. It's funny, my cursor is sort of coming and going. At the intersection of the Puget Trough and the Willamette Valley, both of which have similar ecologies, although the Willamette Valley was created largely by lava flows and the Puget Trough largely by glaciation. But in both cases, they impeded the growth of forests after in recent times, and so they become prairie lands on the west side of the mountains, which we don't tend to think of. And it's an area characterized by the presence of Gary oak, or also known as the Oregon oak, the only species of oak tree that grows as a native in Washington state. Now, these oak prairies of those two ecoregions in their unaltered state are dominated by such wonderful sites as camas prairies, where the Native Americans burned and harvested the camas bulbs for their starch. Wonderful butterfly country, as you can imagine. Islands with a great array of native wildflowers here, more camas, paintbrush, and native western buttercup. This is in the San Juans, but it's similar to the kinds of meadows that occurred in much of the Puget Trough, even down toward Longview and Kelso in relatively recent times. And they host certain specialized butterflies, such as the Taylor's checker spot, which actually I found as close to Longview as Toledo, Washington. But that's all gone now. Much of the habitat for that butterfly has been altered. And so now it's a cause célèbre of an endangered species and doing better on the, particularly on Joint Base Lewis McChord, where the military is working with conservationists and ecologists to manage for that butterfly and other prairie creatures. Here around Longview and farther down into the valley and up into the valleys, we will have had these extensive oak meadows. Today, however, if we still have open spaces like that, they tend to be dominated not by the native sunflowers and buttercups and things, but by the European buttercup and other non-native species of plants, introduced plants, some of which may be favorable for butterflies, some of which are not. The creeping buttercup, unlike our native western buttercup, is good for donkeys, I guess, but it's got almost no redeeming value for our butterflies. Besides the alteration of ecosystems from agriculture, we've also, of course, had the implantation of entirely different uses on the landscape for our human purposes. And this is what many people think of when they think of Longview Kill. So now, there is, of course, so much more to think of than that. But that's important too for jobs, for the products that we all use in fiber, and we're all complicit in the fiber economy, not only complicit, but are beneficiaries of it. But we also all derive the downside of carbon fuels and the replacement of our native habitats. So it's that kind of a balance. And of course, the fight over whether carbon fuels will dominate the Columbia River or not has been extremely active and has been lately in several major decisions favoring not. Nonetheless, in spite of these human impacts on the land, the lower Columbia, which we kind of characterize from starting up around Kalama and Ridgefield and then on down to Owako and the mouth of the river, are characterized by quite an interesting mosaic of remaining habitats. And therefore, we're able to find places for a nice little array of native butterflies and one non-native, which is this, the European cabbage butterfly, which we'll use to begin with, because we first have to ask what butterflies need, because for those habitats to work for butterflies, they need to provide the essential requirements of butterflies. And those are chiefly something for the adults to eat with their drinking straw-like tongues. They don't really suck so much as osmose the fluids up through those drinking straws. They're double drinking straw. But usually that, of course, is the nectar of flowers. They also draw upon other nutrients, such as dissolved salts in mud and gravel, and the amino acid bearing fluids in carrion and scat, and other things that are not as pleasant, perhaps, as flowers. But something for the adult to eat, and they're not as picky there as are their babies, because the other thing we need is the right foods for the caterpillars. Remember, every butterfly and every moth, and by the way, butterflies are just a fancy small subgroup of moths that have evolved to fly by day and have certain other distinctive characteristics. But we're talking chiefly about that group, the butterflies. And all of them are two different kinds of animals during their life. They are a creeping, crawling, worm-like, chewing creature, and they are a flying, sucking creature at a different time of their life. The creeping, crawling, worm-like creatures known as larvae or caterpillars require specific kinds of plants. And as you can see, this is an oak leaf. And so we're going to begin our little tour of Cowlitz Columbia butterflies with our only oak-feeding butterfly. Well, there may be one other becoming established, or two actually. We actually have two other oak-feeding butterflies in Washington now, but in our area, only potentially one right now. And in fact, we don't even have it. I'm starting with a butterfly that we don't even have. That's because it ought to be here. It looks like a moth, doesn't it? But look at the antennae, and you see they have clubs on the end. The group of butterflies called skippers have little curves or hooks on the apiculus or tip of the antenna. The skippers are a substantial group of butterflies as distinguished from the so-called true butterflies. And we have several species, but I'm going to mention just two. The first one being this one that I call the oak skipper, but it's also known as the Propertius duskywing. Propertius was a Greek poet, and I don't know why the old lepidopterists named a lot of butterflies for Greek goddesses and poets and heroes of the Trojan Wars. Well, I do know, really. They had classical educations, and they needed to use them, and they had lots of butterflies to name in the 19th century, and they didn't know much about them, so they named them all sorts of names that have nothing to do with them. So this is the Propertius or oak duskywing. Duskywing is certainly appropriate. And its caterpillars feed on oaks. But it's never been found in Cowlitz County or Clark County or Wahkiakum County or Lewis County or Columbia County, Oregon, all these oak-bearing counties. Why not? It's very common in the gorge as you go east into Klickitat and Yakima counties. And it occurs to the north of us in Thurston and San Juan counties. So why not here? I don't know. I've been looking for years. Maybe you'll find it. Keep looking at the oaks for a butterfly that looks like a moth and flies in the month of May for the most part, around the oak trees. And the best places to find it are where you have younger oak trees where foliage is down low and lots of nectar plants underneath it without very much disturbance of the understory and the ground cover where the eggs overwinter, or perhaps it's the young larvae, I forget. And this photograph is taken in such a place that is very close to Longview. If you go to Carroll's at the big freeway, Spaghetti Junction east of town, don't go on I-5 north or south, but instead continue east and then curve south on the small road that goes through the little community of Carroll's. And it will take you up over the Carroll's Bluffs and back down to Kalama. And on the Carroll's Bluffs, you'll still find some remainders of this beautiful oak habitat in the springtime. One of the best places to go to look for butterflies around here. And that's a good place to keep looking for the oak skipper. Someday it'll turn up in Cowlitz County. Now, we do have another skipper that's very common here right now, as a matter of fact. Might be the only butterfly left flying, except maybe cabbage whites and a couple of others around Cowlitz, Columbia at this late date of September 18th. Oh, there's a few others that can make it if the weather stays nice, just about up to October. And that's when this butterfly generally ceases flying at my house on the 1st of October almost every year. This is a male, which you can tell by the black streak on the wing, called a stigma. And that's where the male sex pheromones are produced. The butterfly is called the woodland skipper. It doesn't really occur in the woodlands so much as everywhere except the woodlands, but it was similar to a European species called Oclotes sylvanus, meaning of the woods. So they called it sylvanoides, and it came to be known as the woodland skipper. But it's the most common butterfly in all of Washington in late summer. Certainly in Western Washington, you can find it in almost all habitats. Here's a female, a little more robust, but it's got these pretty yellow vague spots on a tan hind wing. There's a proboscis coming out to nectar on the hawkbit, which is a widespread dandelion weed here, but an excellent butterfly nectar plant in late summer. So don't cut your dandelions too soon. Let the butterflies have a drink first. The woodland skipper, by the way, is wonderful to watch. I have most years hundreds of them in my place throughout the late summer, and I have observed them for over 40 years. I published a paper recently on the behavior of this butterfly in my yard during the total eclipse of the sun. And it did behave, it did respond to the eclipse. I got some good data out of it in a fun little paper. And it can be very abundant, as I say, and they like to bask in the late afternoon when the day's becoming cooler, but there's still sun. They orient their wings in this odd way, kind of like well, I don't particularly like the metaphor, but people say they're like fighter jets on an aircraft carrier with the forewing tilted up and the hind wing out. But they're the only butterflies that perch this way with their forewings and hind wings at different angles. And they bask with their wings facing the southwest to get the last calories of the sun to be able to nectar a little bit more before flying up into the trees to spend the night. This I photographed on my Asian pear tree with a bunch of woodland skippers nectaring. But if you have lavender in your garden or any herbs or any late flowering asters or other flowers, sedum, go out there when the sun comes back. And if the rain last night didn't take care of them all, you should still have woodland skippers flying. Now we're going to go from the skippers. We do have a few more species of skippers, but those are the ones I'll mention for now. You notice they have very distinct, either short, sharp, tawny wings or broad brown wings, and they fly differently from other butterflies. They really dart around, hence they're called skippers. But now I'm going to the very popular group of butterflies known as the swallowtails. Hold on, you say, that doesn't look like a swallowtail to me. but it's in the family of the swallowtails. And if you were able to examine the conformation of its wing veins and a few other traits, you would see that that's the case. This is a female of a butterfly known as the Clodius Parnassian. Parnassians are named that for Mount Parnassus in Greece, the home of the gods, because most of the Parnassians live up in the high mountains among the gods, as it were, where the sedum grows, the stone crop, which is their caterpillar host plant. And if you go into the Cascades, the higher Cascades in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, right up to the tip top of Burley Mountain or Strawberry Mountain or Jumbo Mountain or Sunrise Peak in the Dark Divide, you will find the mountain Parnassian, which has even more red on it, red on the forewings as well as the hindwings. But down here in the lowlands, we have the Clodius Parnassian, which has beautiful, bright cherry red spots only on the hindwings, which you are seeing through the forewings because they are semi-transparent, like mica, like isinglass, especially on the females. They just don't have the scales, the little shingles on butterflies' wings that give them their color. They just don't have scales over much of their wings. A very unusual butterfly, not uncommon here during the early summer, really mid-June into August. You'll see these big floppy white butterflies flying around the edge of the forest. And what they're doing there is laying eggs for their caterpillars to grow. Caterpillars look like this. This is really the mountain Parnassian, but the caterpillar of ours looks much the same. And by the way, does that remind you of the black millipedes that you often find in your cellars or sometimes in shady parts of the garden, black with yellow spots? It's a poisonous cyanide-bearing millipede that's common with us. Don't worry, they don't hurt you unless you eat them, which you probably won't, or put them up your nose, which I doubt you'll do. But they look like this, and they advertise their unpalatability, their toxicity, to birds and other predators with this bright coloration. Interestingly, the caterpillars of Parnassians have evolved to look like the caterpillars of the Harpaphy millipedes, and therefore they gain protection from the predators also. A very famous example of mimicry, though not as famous as monarchs and viceroys. But what does this caterpillar feed on? Not the dead vegetation here, but in fact, they feed on one of our favorite local native plants, the bleeding heart. The wild bleeding heart is the caterpillar food plant, and possibly the only one, except for maybe the Corydalus, in our area. There are a couple different related species up in the mountains that they will use. But this is the beautiful, very fragrant wild bleeding heart, which you find in many of our woodland edges. And where you do, where a little bit of sun hits the bleeding heart, you're liable to have a good habitat for the Parnassians. Keep an eye out for them. Big and quite dramatic with those bright red spots. Okay, now we get into regular swallowtails. A lot of people call this butterfly a monarch because they call any big bright butterfly a monarch. I don't really mind. Vladimir Nabokov, the great novelist and lepidopterist, said, "I am astonished how little the ordinary person notices butterflies." And that's true. So I'm just happy that people are noticing butterflies. They can call it whatever they want, and then they can be illuminated on what they're actually called by the students of butterflies. In this case, this butterfly is called, as most of you will know, the Western Tiger Swallowtail. You see the tails at the tail end of the wing that give it its name, Swallowtail. The tiger stripes. And I don't have a photograph today of the underside, but if I did, you'd see bright red, orange, and blue metallic spots around the tail. And those bright spots attract birds. They don't attract them, but if a bird is going to strike the butterfly, they tend to strike at the tail with the fancy colors instead of at the body. And therefore, the swallowtails often go free. They'll have maybe a cut in their wing, the way this one does here. That could be from a bird strike or probably from a thorn, but you'll find lots of swallowtails with the tails missing because a bird has struck them. So that's oh, here we go. On the upper side of the pale tiger swallowtail, you can see the colors I'm talking about. Now, if you were a bird going for this butterfly, would you go for this boring bit up here? Or would you go for the fancy cheap trick down here? Birds. They're smart, but not that smart. So time after time, they go for the fancy bit. Then the butterfly gets away free. So that's a strong adaptive load, as evolutionary biologists call it, for the development of those tails. And they have developed in butterflies 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 independent times. Because in nature, if something works well, it develops more than once. This is called convergent evolution. But almost all our swallowtails have the tails, unlike the Parnassians. And these two are both common here. This one a little earlier. That's why you see it on lilac. Go to Hulda Clogger's lilac garden in Woodland in May, and you'll probably see pale tiger swallowtails there. But they're common in our woods. They're caterpillars of both species, feed on, there are these little dragons with wonderful fake eye spots. Those are not to attract bird attacked, by the way, because if a bird attacked them at those eye spots, of course, it would all be over. No, they are actually trying to, we presume, that they are, quote, trying to convince a warbler that they are, in fact, a small serpent. They also have fancy orange antlers that come out of this bit back here called osmeteria that wave around and smell bad. So they've got lots of defenses too. But these cool little green dragons make a silk mat and forage out to feed on the leaves of broadleaf trees. This is actually a two-tailed tiger swallowtail from eastern Washington. But our swallowtails have very similar larvae, and you may find them in the woods, but you'll surely see the big, beautiful yellow and pale yellow swallowtails flying around in early to midsummer. Interestingly, with climate change, I have found here that the tiger swallowtails have shifted their flight later from June into August and are using different nectar plants now, June into July and on into August. The other swallowtail that we have that's can be fairly common here, but it's not seen as often, is the anise swallowtail, A-N-I-S-E. That is a word for, as you probably know as a cook, a kind of spice or plant that is related to dill and caraway and has a strong caraway type taste, the anise. And there's a plant called wild anise in California that the Indians called yampa. That was the food plant for this butterfly down there. So it became known as the anise swallowtail. Our anise swallowtails, which you can see have yellow bands of spots across black wings instead of black tiger stripes across yellow wings. This butterfly can be found in almost every habitat in Washington, from the deserts to the highest mountains and from the edge of the forest into the cities. The Central District of Seattle has a big colony on fennel in the alleys. Just doesn't occur in the deep forest is all. It does occur at forest edges. And here's this caterpillar that feeds on members of the carrot family. So here's one in our garden on dill. Dill is a perfectly good plant to invite these beautiful swallowtails into your garden with. And how much dill can you eat? How many pickles are you going to make? How many carrot greens do you actually eat? So just grow a little more and allow these caterpillars to be there. And then you'll have those beautiful swallowtails in your garden too. This kind of caterpillar starts out looking like a little bird dropping, black and white, and then molts into a big stripy thing that advertises to birds that it really doesn't taste all that good because of the anisoid chemicals in the plants. So at this point, this individual has gone from second to third instar, which means It's just molted out of its bird turd suit into its fancy stripy suit, into its pinstripe suit. How's that? Now we move from the swallowtails into the third family, which is called the, let's see, the skippers are the Hesperiidae. The swallowtails are the Papilionidae. And by the way, Linnaeus in 1758, when he named many of our plants and animals, the great Swedish botanist, in his magnum opus Systemi Naturae, put all of the butterflies into the genus Papilio, just as all the humans and probably Bigfoot and some of the extinct humanoids are in the genus Homo. Well, all the swallowtails were put in the genus Papilio. Since then, thousands of genera have been erected for different butterflies, but Papilio remains the genus of some swallowtails, and so the family is called the Papilionidae, or D, should be di, Papilionidae. Then the next family is called the whites and sulfurs and orange tips. That family is called the Pieridae. Pieridae. We always say Pieridae, but in Latin it should be di. Anyway, the first one I'll mention is the most primitive of them, evolutionarily, and it's called the pine white. This is a lovely male, and this is the very beautiful female with its red border on the underside. These live here. Did you know we had a butterfly of such beauty? But where they live is in an interesting place, only in conifer forests, not in the deep woods, but up in the canopy. And they come down to the sunny edges to take nectar, as this one's doing from a yarrow, it looks like. They, in Seattle and Portland, and I imagine Longview, Kelso, though I haven't seen it, in August, you can see these butterflies flying like a little cloud of white fluff, not fluff, more like little white scraps, flying around the canopies of a big Douglas fir or deodar cedar or hemlock. They'll feed on several species of conifers, but they particularly appreciate pine trees. And it seems like a funny butterfly food plant, but in fact, this female will lay her eggs in rows right on the pine needles, lines them up like that, beautifully camouflaged. I mean, what a gorgeous array. Ain't nature great? They line their eggs up on the pine needles. And then the larvae emerge and they feed on pine needles. Doesn't sound like much of a diet, but that's what they feed on. And then other kinds of conifers. Our other pine feeding butterfly, the pine elfin, which we don't have here because there are no native pines in the Cowlitz Columbia area, except when you get very high up on the Cowlitz watershed. There are no pines down low, no native ones, until you get out to the beach. And then you get the shore pines. And we do have pine elfins, little brown hairstreak butterfly, on the pines out there, as well as pine whites. But they feed on nothing but pine. So you have to have pine trees. The pine whites, this butterfly, feeds on other conifers too. And you see how wonderfully camouflaged it is against the pines. You're getting the idea that most of these butterflies have protective features. Otherwise, the predators would eat them all before they ever became a butterfly. Here's a beautifully camouflaged creature that you've probably seen if you have a garden, because it's here camouflaged on a cabbage leaf, but you'll also find them on your broccoli or any brassica plant. It is the European introduced Cabbageway butterfly. It's our only introduced butterfly. Lots of introduced moths and beetles, but just the one butterfly, except one that occurs way up near the Canadian border in Washington, the little European skipperling, which will probably show up here at some time, feeds on grasses. But the cabbage white turns into this, I think, rather lovely butterfly, which here is behaving in a very dramatic manner. Female on the left has the 2 black spots. Male on the right has the 1 black spot on the forewing. And the female's got her her abdomen poking up in the air, which might seem to be welcoming to the male. In fact, the opposite is true. When the female white sticks her butt in the air, that means do not even think about it. I'm not interested. She has already mated. She's got some of the guy's spermatophore in her bursa copulatrix, and she's not interested in another. She just wants to go find cabbages. So bug off, she's telling the male cabbage white. But he will try and try and try and try, probably not to succeed. Most female butterflies are mated very soon after they close from the pupa. And some will mate repeatedly like monarchs, but most of them spend a lot of time trying not to mate additional times, but to spend their time nectaring and laying their eggs. By the way, if you have cabbage whites in your garden, by all means, do not spray for them. Do not fall for the BT sprays, which are supposed to be organic, it's a bacterium you can use for them, because that will kill all your butterflies and moths. And you can't have a decent nectar garden or butterfly garden if you use BT. You just can't do it. So you know what you do? You walk around your cabbages and you pick them off. It's not that hard. Or else just steam them with the broccoli. And that's a good way for a vegan to get a little bit of protein, animal protein that is really just recycled cabbage. And how much cabbage can you eat? So just leave some for the cabbage whites. Often, this European butterfly is the only butterfly flying, and it's a really good city butterfly. So enjoy them. I'm in Astoria quite a bit, and really almost the only butterfly I see around Astoria, for the most part, are cabbage whites, and they're there from April through into October, and I love them. So dig them. However, they're not the only whites we have. It turns out that we have a very beautiful species of native white butterfly, common with us, one of our 3 or 4 best adapted Cowlitz Columbia butterflies. Ta-da! It's called the veined white. You see the dark scaling along the veins, or a more recent common name for it we tend to use now is the margined whites, because the margin of the wings, especially on the upper side, can be dark with scales. But it varies a lot. You'll find individuals with almost no dark scales that are almost butter yellow, look like a flying butter pad. And other individuals that are and those are especially females, and you'll find males that are completely white with not a single marking. Just about the only completely pristine white butterfly in the world. And they're the late summer males of this species. I say late summer because this butterfly has 2 or 3 generations with us. They come out early in the spring, as you see is nectaring here on salmonberry, which is an early spring flower, and sometimes February, but into March and April, and on into May, which is one of the major spring nectar flowers for our spring azure butterflies, but also for the rufous hummingbirds. So that's a very important nectar plant, salmonberry, as is the red currant in the gorge. And the margin whites, which are just beautiful, love it. But they also have a midsummer generation, and if it stays warm, they'll have an autumn generation as well. So you can see linen fresh margin whites flying around the Cowlitz Columbia all summer long. And by the way, this is one of the butterflies that does very well in the managed forests in our commercial timberlands, if they haven't been sprayed with aerial herbicides. If they do, then just about all the nectar plants and caterpillar food plants are gone. But if they haven't been sprayed, then the forest roads commonly host salmonberry and coltsfoot and other nectar plants, as well as the caterpillar host plant for this butterfly, which is a very pretty little crucifer called cardamine or dentarium or ladies' smocks. So the managed forest can be good for this butterfly if it's managed without chemicals. Here's a butterfly that's very special to me and to many because of its sheer beauty. The males are milk white with citrus orange wingtips. And the females are butter yellow with the orange wingtips, not quite as large. You might not be surprised to hear that these are called orange tips. In my earlier book, The Butterflies of Cascadia, it will be called the Sarah's orange tip. But a lot of taxonomical research has been done on orange tips. They've been changed into different species, just as we're supposed to call our wonderful little winter wren, we're supposed to call the Pacific wren now. That's very difficult for me. So we're now supposed to call Sarah's orange tip Julia's orange tip. And you'll see it called that in Caitlin Labar and my newer Butterflies of the Pacific Northwest field guide. Who were Sarah and Julia and Stella and other women that the orange tips were named for by William Henry Edwards in the 19th century? I don't know, maybe his nieces, his daughters. He did not preserve their provenance. Excuse me. But Julia's orange tip, where are you going to find it? Not in the city. It has been eradicated from the near city habitats. And it doesn't go very far west on the Columbia either. The westernmost individual I've found was barely into Wahkiakum County at Abe Creek along what I call the lower gorge, along the river there, west of Mill Creek, east of Kathlama. But one place you can surely see it in the springtime, April is the best month for it. If it's sunny, you got to go out when it's sunny and warm, which can be hard in April. And on into May is at the Carrolls again, the Carrolls Bluffs down by Kalama, just north of Kalama, the Carrolls Bluffs. That's a really good place for orange tips. Or if you go up to Mount Rainier, any of the mountain roads into Mount Rainier in the springtime, you'll see orange tips at the seeps by the road. So follow the Cowlitz up to its glacier and you'll see orange tips all the way. They come out later in the summer, higher up, all butterflies do. Earlier, lower, later, higher. The other group of the Pierridae, the whites and sulfurs and orange tips, are the sulfurs or yellows. We don't have many around here. There's the western sulfur up in the Olympics and the Cascades. Go over to the east side of the mountains and you can find thousands of western clouded sulfurs and orange sulfurs in the alfalfa patches where they have adapted. This is a butterfly that's much more numerous in North America than it would have been in pre-contact times because humans have planted so many of their host plants. But this butterfly does show up in the Cowlitz Columbia Basin in late summer. I haven't seen any this year, but some summers in August and September, excuse me, we get quite a few of them. And there was a summer, about 6 or 8 years ago, when they absolutely exploded on the red clover of the hayfields in Wahkiakum County, thousands of them. The male on the left, the female on the right with what we call its fenestrated or windowed wings. And they're, again, undergoing courtship. And once again, female's putting her back end up in the air saying, no thanks. And the male's trying, as he will continue to do. Very seldom get pictures of their upper sides like this. The bright, beautiful orange sulfur or alfalfa butterfly. So watch for them coming through town, nectaring on your marigolds or zinnias late in the summertime. We go now to the next to the last family, the blues, coppers, and hairstreaks, known as the Lysanidae or the gossamer wings. Gossamer is like spider web or silk or some fleecy substance that's almost not even there. And they were called that a long time ago because of their bright, airy colors. They're little, most of them. A lot of them are blue. And if you go up in the mountains on the mountain trails where there's some moisture by the trail, or perhaps a horse has just gone by and urinated on the trail, or perhaps it was a lepidopterist because they know the utility of such things, the butterflies will come to the wet patches, especially if they bear some chemicals like salts. That is to say, organic or excuse me, non-organic salt type chemicals, not artificial chemicals. They come for the salt. They need the salt to replenish their spermatophores. And so it's only males that come to the what we call mud puddle clubs. But you can see hundreds of blues and skippers and swallowtails by the dozen, sometimes at these mud puddle clubs in the mountains. Down here, the common blue for us, and it can be quite common in the springtime, even in the city, even in your gardens, but certainly out on the edges of the forest and all along the Columbia backwaters, all along the sloughs coming into town in the west, all along Willow Grove. You drive around Willow Grove in the March and April and May on a sunny day, and you'll see these butterflies flying around the red osier dogwoods and the ninebark and the other flowering shrubs. This is called the spring azure, or really on the west coast now, this species is called the echo azure, azure being its shade of blue. This one you can see is sucking up some salts from the mud. It's a male. The female has less blue, a lot more gray on the upper side. And she lays her eggs on the unopened flower buds of dogwood, ninebark, and as I say, many other species of flowering shrubs. And the caterpillars feed on those, developing flowers and seeds. And we also have a late summer generation of them. But that's one of our most delightful spring butterflies. And you can find them in many habitats near watercourses where there are the red dogwoods, the red-stemmed dogwoods. Another blue that we have nearby is the silvery blue. Flies pretty early, April, usually beginning. And Carroll's Bluffs is again a very good place to see them, almost certain on a sunny day in April, along the edge of the road. Be careful of the traffic there. And also right with the orange tips. But also any place you can pull off safely along the lower parts of the river if there are pink or American vetch plants growing. Pink or purple vetch plants. The caterpillars feed on vetches and also lupins. Lots of colonies of lupins have a colony of silvery blues as well. And just south of the industrial part of Kalama, there is a big bluff that you can get up onto. There's a little road going up onto it, up above the railroad track. And there is a huge colony of silvery blues there on the American vetch plants. We also have a little butterfly called the western-tailed blue, and that grows happily as a caterpillar on the vetches as well. In fact, that's its main food plant here. It loves the native giant vetch. That's its favorite, but it'll grow on the European and weedy vetches as well. Got that little spot of orange and blue and a little tail. Is it a swallowtail? No, this is a separate instance of a different group of butterflies also evolving the tail and the bright spot to detract the attacks of birds away from the body toward the edge of the wings. The western-tailed blue, not in the city, but out in the rural areas on the roadsides. If there's a stand of vetch, you may find them. And one final blue here was discovered only in one place, anywhere near Longview. In fact, it's only one of 4 or 5 places known west of the Cascades where this butterfly is known in Washington. It's called the Ackman Blue, A-C-M-O-N. Don't know what that means. What a pretty thing, orange on the hind wing only. And Louis Lapierre, the great biologist at Lower Columbia College, discovered these just west of Longview. Caitlin and I have both been there to see them on a place called Mosquito Creek. I believe it's Weyerhaeuser land. And this butterfly has a colony there on a species of vetch. But in this case, it's on a native vetch. I'll show you in a minute. But there's another butterfly also on that vetch. And this is the only colony of them known in the Willapa Hills. There must be more, but we haven't found them yet. They're called green hairstreaks. Can you imagine? We got a butterfly that looks like that flying around here? Well, we do. One of the subspecies is called Washingtonia, named for Washington, but that's up east of the Cascades. This one has a different name. It's called the bramble green hairstreak. Calophrys dumatorum, and dumatorum, and that means of the brambles. So the names make sense sometimes. And both the Ackman Blue and the greenie, the bramble green hairstreak, live on this plant known as Lotus or Hosakia crassifolia, also known as giant deer vetch or pink lotus. There's not very much of it in the hills. There's a lot of it up in the north of the Willapa Hills and in the Cascades. But if you can find that plant anywhere near in the Willapa Hills, please look in spring and let me know if you find a colony of either of those butterflies. I've been looking forever on little patches of it out here and without luck. Now I use the term hairstreak because this little group of the gossamer wings has a tiny tail on the hind wing. Once again, independently evolved. Here's the third time. The bright colors and the little tail to attract bird strikes. And this one does live near here on cedars. It's called the cedar hairstreak. Here's nectaring on another pretty pink flower called the dogbane. Spreading dogbane is the best butterfly nectar plant you're going to find. If you have any of that growing anywhere near you or in your garden, you're going to have some good luck with the butterflies coming to that. It's just a magnet for them. But this butterfly requires cedar trees because its caterpillars feed, believe it or not, on the younger cedar foliage. So if you have a nice cedar stand and some nectar plants in the sun nearby, you might be able to find the cedar hairstreak in May. But in some ways, most hairstreak-like hairstreak is this one. It's called the gray hairstreak. And you see the great little tails it's got, the little hairs. It's got the hairs for the hairstreak. The hairs are the tails. The streak is, I don't know, whether it's the streaks on the wings or the fact that they streak around in flight. They're called hairstreaks, and this one's called the gray, and it's the biggest generalist of any of our butterflies. Its caterpillars feed on all kinds of plants, everything from hops to beans, and it's been thought to be a pest on both of those crops, though I kind of doubt it, and lots and lots of other things. So it can appear anywhere in the state, in the city, in the country, not in the deep forest, but just about every other habitat, but you can never expect it anywhere. Best place to look and really have a good chance is out in the sage lands in the springtime. Lots of other places though, and I'm very happy to say that after watching butterflies here at Swede Park, my old Swedish homestead in the Willapa Hills in Grays River, for 42 years, I've been looking for this butterfly, and I hadn't found it until 1 week ago. And a little tiny gray hairstreak appeared with the skippers and with a melita crescent and with two little purplish coppers on my goldenrods. So goldenrods for the butterfly garden, a good choice. I finally have the gray hairstreak on my butterfly list. You may see it too. It's a good town butterfly. As is this one, if you have the right part of town, called the purplish copper. We're going now to the third group of gossamer wings. We have the blues, the hairstreaks, and now the coppers. And the only copper you're going to find anywhere in the Cowlitz Columbia until you go up to the headwaters of the Cowlitz is the Columbia, is the purplish copper. This is a male. The forewing is penny brown, but in the right sunlight, it has a bright purple reflection. Then on the underside, those pretty colors of silvery and gold with that bright orange zigzag. Can't mistake it for anything. Then the female has a lot more orange and black spotting on the upper side, but its caterpillars feed on species of rumex or sorrel or dock, as it's known, and also on the smartweed, polygonum, the pink flower that grows in a lot of marshy areas, the smartweed. And you can find any patch of smartweed or dock, and you've got a good chance of finding purplish hairstreaks, both in the spring and in the late summer, 2 generations. Finally, into our last family. I know I'm running up on an hour now, and we're going to go probably a little bit more than that. We'll get to our questions quite soon. But we're going to go into the last family, known as the brush-footed butterflies, with this stolen, not very good picture, but it shows you what it looks like, of the Western Meadow Fritillary butterfly, which is like other fritillaries in that it has this distinctive pattern of black and orange, black spots on a tawny or rusty orange upper side. This one's small. It's about 1 inch to 1.5 inches across, very pretty rusty and purple below. And it's common in our woodlands on the edges, on the sunny edges, along these streams and in clearings in the springtime. So watch for the Western Meadow Fritillary, and you'll probably be pleased to find them. Of the bigger fritillaries, known as silver spots, we really only have 2 species in the area right around here. This one is common in the mountains, up in the Willapa Hills and the Cascades, and it occasionally comes down into town in the late summer, mostly in August, called the Hydaspy Fritillary. And if you can get past the gates up into the logging country, we used to be able to do so much butterflying in the Willapa Hills, but with everything gated now, it's become very difficult, which is a great sadness to a lot of us. But up in those hills, in an area that hasn't been logged too recently, but has had a show or two not too long ago, you'll find the Hydaspy Fritillary is fairly common, nectaring on knapweeds and thistles. But the biggest and most gorgeous of the fritillaries around here is called the Great Spangled Fritillary. It's not quite this big, but it's fully 2 to 3 inches across. This is a male. The female is kind of a vanilla and chocolate color. The male is a lovely Union Pacific orange and cinnamon, and it's got these bright silver spots underneath. Great Spangled Fritillary isn't common around here until you get up into the hills. And if you go as far as you can on the Kalama River Road into the Cascades, until you get to Gates, and then walk after that, or if you go up into Rose Valley, into the hills, and find a vacant lot or an open area by the creek in the sun with thistles or knapweed, you're likely to find fritillaries nectaring. But they don't come out too early. They come out in about the 4th of July and on into August. Great Spangled Fritillary, subspecies Pugetensis, named for the Puget Trough. So some call it the Puget Fritillary. And all the fritillaries have in common that they feed as caterpillars on violets. You have to have violets or you will not have fritillaries. I've got a lot of violets growing semi-wild. They're not a native species in my so-called lawn, which is pretty much a meadow. And this year I had the Western Meadow Fritillaries, I'm almost certain, breeding in my lawn, which is very, very cool. But if you go to the wooded areas on the streams where the sun gets through in dappled sunshine, where you have either the purple violets or around here, mostly the 2 species of yellow violets, the evergreen and the stream, you got a good chance getting fritillaries. If you want to see the adults, they nectar on thistles above all else. Now, we don't have many native thistles left. They're almost all gone. But we have quite a few weedy introduced European bull thistles and Canada thistles. And though they are considered noxious weeds, they are superb butterfly nectar plants for the swallowtails and for the fritillaries and the skippers. So if you've got thistles and they're not really doing anybody any harm, keep them at least until they bloom. You can always deadhead them to prevent their spread, but they're the best nectar plants. It's not only, I'm a life member of the Native Plant Society of Washington, but it's not only the native plants that provide a lot of resources to our butterflies. A lot of them have adapted to introduced species of caterpillar plants and nectar plants. Now we come down to our lovely little local butterfly of great abundance called the Melita crescent or crescent spot. You see the little crescent markings around the hind wing. And on the underside, those crescents are silvery colored, very pretty, like a silver moon. Nectaring here on a, looks like a Queen Anne's lace. Almost nothing does nectar on Queen Anne's lace, so good for it. But you'll find them, a few of them in the springtime and a lot more in the late summer brood along roadside edges and in meadows. They like to cruise along paths. So if you have a kind of a pathway through tall grass and you see a bright orange thing cruising along in front of you, it'll be a male melita crescent. Their caterpillars feed on thistle. So you got to have thistles of some kind or another if you're going to have melita crescents, as well as painted lady butterflies. That's a butterfly we had almost none of this year, and yet some years they come up from the south in such numbers that they actually shut down I-5 in Southern California. We've had years where we've had many, many thousands of these. And then the caterpillars, which form webs on thistle plants, will devastate the thistles, and the farmers don't have to spray for their thistles or cut them because the painted ladies take care of them for them. Painted lady is a gorgeous butterfly that does not overwinter here, although it may be starting to as things are getting warmer. But they migrate up from the south or immigrate. There is some evidence of a movement back south again in the fall, but it's not like monarchs where they all come and they all go back. Their migration is not very well understood, and it's probably not going to get that way because so many of them are raised from commercial kits for raising and releasing in schools. And therefore, it's hard to tell what they're really doing in the wild in nature. But there are several species of painted ladies. This is the common one in a year when it is common, as I say, very rare this year. But the rarest one that's native here, possibly year round, is this one on the left, the American painted lady. It's known by its great, big, beautiful eye spots that, of course, attracts butterfly or bird attack and therefore protects the body. These are big enough, they might also actually intimidate the birds, like eyes. They might serve both purposes. And it's got the prettiest pink on the underside of the forewings. That color of pink is quite rare in nature. Where do we know it? We know it in salmon and not that many other places. I love it. But this butterfly is very rare in Washington, more common in Oregon. I've had more records in my garden because I'm south near the Columbia than any other place in Washington. The only place I've ever seen it common was with Tia up on Mount St. Helens in the blast zone, not too many years after the eruption. This would have been in the late 80s, about 10 years after the eruption probably. And the blast zone was coming up in masses and acres of pearly everlasting, which is its caterpillar host plant. And that butterfly was actually quite common on the blast zone that day. I've not been able to find it back at St. Helens since then, but that was the one time I've ever seen it common. Related to the painted ladies, in fact, it is another species of painted lady, but has a different name. It's what people call the red admiral, or I use the old name to distinguish it from the other admiral butterflies, which is red admirable. Here's this underside, and here is its gorgeous upper side, displaying these bright red bars. It is the first butterfly that first seduced me away from seashells as a kid naturalist. Okay, I'm going to move my camera. No, it won't work because I'm on a screen share. Never mind. Over to my right is my childhood shell collection. The very same one I had when I was 7 years old in the shelf my mother made me. The shells were my life as a kid, which was stupid because I lived in Colorado, which is landlocked. And finally, when I was 11, I saw a red admiral butterfly. And I said, wow, there's a lot more butterflies here than seashells here in Colorado. Let there be butterflies. And I became a lepidopterist instead of a kid conchologist then and there. So I owe this butterfly a great debt. You wouldn't be here today either if it weren't for the red admiral. You'd be doing something useful instead. Now, I want to tell you about three of our brightest and prettiest butterflies as I close down toward the end here. The red admirable, this one called the Milbert's tortoiseshell, and this one called the satyr anglewing. All three of them are quite common in the right places, including around the edges of Longview, Kelso, up and down the gorge, in open areas at the edges of woods, if they have one characteristic present. All three of those require one thing, and that is this plant. This is a caterpillar of the satyr anglewing. Can you tell what the plant is? I'll take a show of hands. Can't see you, but some of you know it is stinging nettle, the native stinging nettle. You might find stinging nettle to be a nasty, noxious, horrible plant you want to get rid of. Don't do it, because when you do, you're getting rid of the satyr anglewing, the Milbert's tortoiseshell, and the red admirable. Three of our very most beautiful, gardenable, watchable, urban edge butterflies. All of them can occur right in town. If you got a patch of woods or patch of habitat with stinging nettle. So yay for nettles. Find a place for them. One other species of tortoiseshell has a very strange ecology that benefits us from time to time. It's called the California tortoiseshell. It doesn't occur here. Your tortoiseshell, you can see why. It's the color of old tortoiseshell glasses or combs. On the upper side, the underside is very brown and gray and black like bark. So it's camouflage beneath, bright above. When it spreads its wings, it startles the birds and scares them for a minute while it gets away. But this butterfly doesn't occur here normally year-round. It's up in the Cascades, where its caterpillars feed on species of Ceanothus or buckbrush. Here it's feeding on mountain balm, Ceanothus volutinus. On the right is mountain lilac, Ceanothus intergeramus, common in Klickitat County. And this butterfly, unlike many others, which are kind of a steady state ecology, eats itself out of house and home. It will devastate and defoliate the buckbrush. And when it does, you can go up there and see the pupae and the larvae, the chrysalides, hanging like Christmas ornaments on the plants all over. Quite a spectacle. Then come back a week later, they've hatched, and there's scads of California tortoiseshells all over the place. And when that happens, they migrate. It's not really a migration. They erupt, it's called I-R-R-U-P-T, erupt, not erupt, but erupt. And they go out in vast numbers, and sometimes directionally, sometimes not. And a lot of them fly toward the tops of mountains. They exhibit phototaxis. They fly toward the sun, toward the light, toward the tops. And I get so many emails and even letters still, phone calls from people thinking they see monarchs migrating on top of Mount Hood or up on Sandy Ann Pass or White Pass. Nope, it's California tortoiseshells. And when that happens, they can spill over into Longview, Kelso, and even down the gorge all the way to the coast, where they hit the water and start flying south along the coast. And then they can breed here if we have ornamental mountain lilac in our gardens. Not lilac, but Ceanothus, it's known as mountain lilac. And they have the interesting trait, all the tortoiseshells and all the anglewings have the trait, 8 species in Washington, 6 of them here. They have the trait of overwintering as butterflies. So they'll try to come into your house or into your woodshed or a cabin. This is one that Tia spotted hunkering by the edge of our front door of our old farmhouse. So we, instead of letting it into the farmhouse, which would be too warm for it, we took it out into the woodshed and it spent the winter there. And the final tortoiseshell is the other butterfly that seduced me as a kid, because after I saw that red admirable, I saw this butterfly cruising over the top of the cottonwood tree that saved my life in the giant hailstorm that I write about in my book, The Thunder Tree. And when I saw my first mourning cloak, oh my gosh, what a brilliant, wonderful butterfly. I think you'll agree. Big, soaring, all chocolate and blueberries and vanilla ice cream. Oh, I was then completely taken in by butterflies. It's still one of my favorites. And to my joy, I get both of these butterflies here. Mourning cloaks mostly in the spring, having overwintered on the cherry laurels and red admirables, usually in the autumn, big and bright and beautiful on the butterfly bush. These overwinter too, and you'll find you can see in January or February or March, on a sunny day, you can see mourning cloaks flying around. It's not because of a New Year's hangover, it's because they have come out on a warm day in the middle of their hibernation. Then they'll go back in for the rest of winter like the groundhog. But maybe our most dramatic garden butterfly here, besides the tiger swallowtails, is the Lorquin's admiral. That's why I use admirable for the red admiral. It's not related to these admirals. This is related to viceroys that mimic the monarch. This mimics a different species in California called the California sister. But up here, it feeds on willows as caterpillars, and it's common. It's common in the city, it's common in the woods, it's common along the roadsides, and particularly on a dappled, sunny woodland pathway or road. You'll see these butterflies behaving territorially. The males will perch on a particular leaf and fly out at you, fly out at birds, fly out at other butterflies, trying really to both scare other males away, but also hoping that everything it sees is a female. I saw one once chase a glaucous-winged gull for hours in a rose garden. Lorquin's admiral, have some willows on hand or plant this wonderful native plant called ocean spray, which is a superb caterpillar host plant for Lorquin's admiral, the pale tiger swallowtail, and the spring azure butterfly. There aren't many plants you get more butterfly mileage out of than ocean spray, and there's a lot of it along the Columbia. So go west of Longview to the old bit of road of Mill Creek. There's a bit of the old highway with some cool old bridge arches, and you can walk along that old road, be safe from the traffic on SR4, and you can see all of those butterflies, all three of those and lots of others on the ocean spray. Finally, we come down to the group known as the satyrs. They're in this final family too. You know, I never told you the name of the final family. All these butterflies have been discussing, these oranges and tortoiseshells and anglewings and things, fritillaries, are called the brush-footed butterflies. Family is called the Nymphalidae. And they are distinctive because they don't have 6 apparent legs. Insects supposed to have 6 legs, but how many can you see here? Only 4. How come? Are they not insects? Of course, they have 6 legs, but the other 2 legs are little tiny kitty cat paws up here. Whereas one person put it, the brushfoots are T-Rex butterflies. There are 4 legs, are little tiny feet up front. And this is the next to the last group of them, called the wood nymphs. Male on the left, female on the right. The females are very often bigger and paler in butterflies. And when they fly, they're mated, hooked up at the back end. And when they fly, if they're disturbed, usually it's the female that will carry. And the male will just hang there limpid, not limpid, but limp, and let the female carry because they're bigger and stronger. And they're also more protected from predators. They both got the eye spots, but the females have a really dramatic eye spot. And I studied these with my first scientific grant I ever got when I was in high school in Colorado. I studied these butterflies on my old ditch, the Highline Canal. And I found that more than 25% of the wood nymphs that I sampled had bird strikes out of the eye spotted part of the wing. 25%, that's a very strong adaptive load for the evolution and refinement of eye spots in butterflies. This is called a large wood nymph, and you can find it in the edges of the woody edges of fields and pastures in the Lower Columbia area. Our other member of this subfamily, which are called the satyrs, by the way, the satyrs, like the rustic deities, the satyrs and fauns and dryads and nymphs. The early lepidopterists thought of these meadow-dwelling butterflies like those ancient Greek deities, just flying around on a constant bacchanal, drinking and mating. And they were right. That's basically what they do. And they do it in green meadows because both the wood nymphs and this butterfly, known as the ochre ringlet, pretty little ringlet, feed on grasses as caterpillars and only grasses, as does, by the way, and I didn't tell you this, the woodland skipper and its relatives. Those skippers and these, so at the beginning and end, that we have grass-feeding butterflies. The ochre ringlet, the ochre is this color. The ringlet refers to little eye spots around here that this species has in much of the country, but our subspecies out here has lost the ringlets or has very few. And it's wonderfully camouflaged until it puts out its bright ochre wings and startles a bird. But they occur in certain grassy areas. I found them right in the roadside verge by Mrs. Beasley's hamburger stand off the freeway up at Vader, for example. So if you're in a grassy open area in the May, June, or August, look for the two broods of the ochre ringlet. And our last, almost our last butterfly I'm going to mention is, of course, this one, and you all know it. It's not a tiger swallowtail. This is what a monarch really does look like. This is a monarch, big cinnamon butterfly, 3 inches across. Male has the black androconial patches on the hind wing for the pheromones. Female does not. But we don't see them here, except extremely rarely. This butterfly is known for its migrations and the giant clusters they gather in at the mountains of Michoacan in Mexico, and the somewhat smaller clusters in California along the coast from San Luis Obispo up to Marin County, Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara. And they're known for their coevolution with milkweeds. You don't have monarchs unless you have milkweeds. And that's why we don't have monarchs, because milkweed stops in the Columbia Gorge right about the Klickitat-Clark County border. I mean, Klickitat-Skamania County border. You don't get milkweed in Western Washington, west of there, except for some that people plant or that has grown along the railway lines. So we don't get monarchs in Western Washington, and very little in Western Oregon, north of Salem. There's milkweed south of there. There's a caterpillar feeding on milkweed, which is full of toxins, heart poisons, cardiac glycosides. And the caterpillar has these fancy hoosies, doodads, and bright stripes to tell birds, don't eat me because you're really going to hate it. You're going to barf your guts out if you do. There's the milkweed. So watch for that when you go east in the Columbia, east into Klickitat, and you might find monarchs. But sadly, the westernmost monarchs that overwinter on the California coast have crashed, probably due to global warming. It seems that the rising ocean temperatures are making the winter grounds in the foggy coast of California too warm to keep the overwintering clusters of monarchs. That's the hypothesis. Also, a lot of the milkweed's been lost from development, and the eucalyptus trees they overwinter in. For a number of reasons, the western monarchs have collapsed, except they have become fairly common as a garden butterfly in the Bay Area, where the caterpillars are feeding on an introduced southern tropical form of milkweed. So the monarch in western US seems to be evolving from a migratory butterfly that filled eastern Washington and Oregon and occasionally plopped over into Cowlitz, Wahkiakum, Columbia counties, just the odd individual. When they overran the migration, we could see, but not anymore because they're becoming probably a stay-at-home garden butterfly in the Bay Area on an introduced plant. It's a sad decline, but at least they're not becoming extinct. And lots of efforts are being undertaken on their behalf. A potential listing and also 2 laws in Congress to provide funds for trying to help the monarchs, both in the East, which are declining too because of logging in Mexico, and GMO crops wrecking the milkweeds in the Eastern US. All that's being taken up as a conservation cause in a big way, and who knows, maybe we'll save them. But I can't leave without saying a word about this gorgeous animal. Why didn't I mention that? It's as pretty as any of our butterflies, and it's common here. Get out of town, even in town, you'll see them, because it's not a butterfly. If you can see the end of the antennae, I can't on my screen because there's symbols up there. The ends of the antennae have no knobs. It's a moth. It's an introduced European species of moth called the cinnabar moth, and it was introduced for its caterpillars, which the children in my valley call tansy tigers. Isn't that a great name? To feed on the introduced European weed known as tansy ragwort, Senecio jacobii. And this moth is called I can't think of its genus, but its species is jacobii also, because it feeds only on this plant. And like the California tortoiseshell, it eats itself out of house and home. It devastates the host plant. And so where the tansy ragwort has been really bad, it's got liver toxins that poisons horses and cows. So it's not a good weed, although it is a good butterfly nectar plant. This butterfly, this moth has been introduced by the weed boards, as has a flea beetle, and they have devastated the tansy ragwort. But you have to keep putting them back from time to time. In the meantime, it's become a very common part of our natural history. And so I consider it to be an honorary butterfly of the Cowlitz Columbia. And it's not the only beautiful moth here that people mistake for butterflies. This flies by day, of course. That's why it's bright colored, and it advertises its colors. It's called aposematism to the birds. The fact that it's highly toxic because its caterpillars fed on the toxic tansy ragwort. But there are other moths here that are also mistaken for butterflies. Can you imagine that this gorgeous animal lives here and is not uncommon? You don't see them because they fly at night in the wee hours of the morning. But they do, and they'll come to gas station lights or the big Arco lights or stadium lights. And people will bring them to me every year and say, "What's this?" This is a male, you see by the big feathery antennae that are used as antennae to detect the female's pheromones. All they have to do is to smell one molecule. They smell with their antennae. And then they can hone in on the stream of pheromones and locate a female up to 10 or 12 miles away. So it's mostly the males that are on the move, and the ones we find near the big lights, which confound them and wreck their mating plans, by the way. The night lighting is extremely hard on our native moths and bats. Well, the bats will hunt around the lights, so sometimes they get some benefit from it. But our native moths have dramatically declined because of the big night lighting. But this species is still here, and it is known as the Polyphemus moth. Polyphemus is another name for the cyclops. Cyclops had only one eye in Ulysses. This one has two, but just consider this one eye on each side, two cyclops. So it's the Polyphemus. Gorgeous colors, isn't it? That one's just out of its chrysalis. They only live for a week or so because they don't feed as adults. They got no mouth parts that work. They only feed as big old fleshy caterpillars on the leaves of broadleaf trees like oaks and willows and maples, probably mostly maples here, maybe alders. But watch for them in the spring around the big lights. Maybe they'll come to your windows. The Polyphemus moth, not uncommon. People think it must be incredibly rare because they don't see them very often. And the other one is another equally big, you see how big, moth. It's our other giant silk moth related to the Cecropia and the Luna and the Promethea moth of the East. But in the West, they have a lot more there because of the hardwood forests. But in the West, we just have these two big species here, the Polyphemus and the Ceanothus, named for the Ceanothus bushes that it loves to feed on. But it will also feed on Douglas fir and various other kinds of trees as a caterpillar. It doesn't do any harm, aren't enough of them. Again, a male, as you see from its big antennae, to find the female pheromones. It's also known as the red silk moth. So watch for these two. Finally, to close, a word about global warming, because it will affect our butterflies. I could have said a lot more about conservation, but I indicated at the beginning that habitat conservation is essential. The work of the Columbia Land Trust has done wonders for saving butterfly habitat and the habitat of many pollinators in the Columbia Cowlitz watershed, and all the conservation organizations that work here. So, and of course, our fiber companies too, when they practice best stewardship practices, and really please, folks, when they minimize aerial spraying of herbicides, which remains, in my view, the most benighted aspect of current forestry practices. Practice the most ecologically friendly forestry we can. That too will be a great boon to our butterflies. And it can be, as it has been for our blues and our whites, our swallowtails. But whether we're talking industrial forest land or conserved land by the Columbia Land Trust, or all of our private land in between, or the other public lands, we're going to see some shifts. Shifts in how much land we can conserve and manage carefully, versus develop, and shifts because of climate. This butterfly is known as the sachem skipper. Its stigma is really big and dramatic. And so I think the early scientists called it the sachem, which is a Native American name for chief, because of the fancy regalia that chiefs may wear. They considered the big stigma to be fancy regalia for this butterfly. So it's called the sachem skipper. That's the male. The female is doesn't have the big stigmata, but do I have her? Yes, there's an underside of the female. Nectaring on our wonderful native Douglas aster. By the way, no better late summer nectar plant for your garden than Douglas aster, a native plant, or else any kinds of asters. But this butterfly is the first one to have a PhD done on it for global warming, because it used to occur in California, then it started moving into Oregon, and now it has moved into Washington as a resident. I found the very first individual in Washington outside the Vancouver Mall about 20 years ago. And now it's spread all through the southern tier of counties. Has not yet been found in Cowlitz County, but I expect it will very soon, known as the sachem skipper. And a PhD was done on how it is adapting to climate change to shift its range north. Some butterflies are going to lose out by shifting off the tops of mountains. We're going to lose some Washington butterflies to climate change, but we're also going to gain some. We may gain this fabulous tropical thing called the great purple hairstreak. I don't know why. Long time ago, they named it the great purple because it's not purple, it's blue. We should call it the great blue hairstreak, but believe it or not, that occurs right down in the Willamette Valley. Check the underside. Gorgeous long tails, bright orange body, bright orange near the body. And it's playing two different stratagems for protecting itself against birds. First of all, it's absolutely brilliant, so the bird can't miss it, and it can't miss its orange body or spots. If it's eaten one before or tried to, it knows it tastes terrible. It's toxic. So we'll see that and leave it alone. But if it's naive and has not eaten one and sees one perched and just goes for it, it'll go for this bit, not for this bit. But why don't we have them here in Washington when they have them in the Willamette Valley? Because as caterpillars, are in oaks, yes, but it doesn't feed on oak. It feeds on oak mistletoe. And we have quite a bit of Gary oak in Cowlitz County and points north, but we do not have oak mistletoe. That stops in the northern Willamette Valley. I have never seen a single plant of oak mistletoe in Washington state. And if anyone has, please let me know. It'll be a surprise. But with climate change and things warming and drying, it's very likely that the oaks will increase, the mistletoe will move north, and the fabulous oak mistletoe blue hairstreak may come with it. There is its caterpillar. Excuse me, obviously not. There's this little tiny egg, this little jewel box of an egg on the mistletoe. There's this little slug-like caterpillar. There's its cute little pupa in its sweet little hammock. Pardon me, but you got to admit, that's kind of terminally cute. And out of that will come, I mean, talk about rock the cradle. Rock the cradle. Even has this little safety belt. And out of that will come this great blue hairstreak that Tia photographed in Texas in this case. So watch for those as things heat up. Another one that will probably move into Clatsop County, excuse me, I meant to say Cowlitz County, and has in fact been recorded in Cowlitz County and in Clark County. And I've recorded 4 or 5 of them here at my place because I'm near the border, is the beautiful, big, dramatic, citrus-winged butterfly known as the California sister. The old story is it was called the sister because its black and white wings resembled the habit of a nun at the California missions with a little bit of blonde hair peeking out of her wimple. I don't know if that's true. But our Lorquin's admiral butterfly is thought to mimic the California sister in California. But it hasn't yet come to be a resident in Washington. It feeds on oaks also as caterpillars. Its caterpillar looks like a dragon. And here it is on a live oak tree in California, but it might move in and feed on our Gary oaks. And the last butterfly I'm going to invoke as a Cowlitz Columbia butterfly is also one that has a great old history right in Cowlitz County in Longview. This butterfly is called the buckeye for obvious reasons. I think its eye spots are a little too big and a little too close to the body to be just a target. It obviously has targets, but this one's so big it probably scares predators. And it's been seen only 3 times in Washington, twice in recent years, photographed by some great butterfly photographer women there's a whole cadre of mostly women. Butterfly collectors all used to be all guys. There's been a shift in gender and a shift in practice. Most of the study of butterflies now is done by cameras, although the butterfly nets remain absolutely necessary because we still have to study insects by catching them, or we don't always know what we have. And in fact, our most prominent up-and-coming lepidopterist is a resident of the Cowlitz Columbia, and it's a woman named Caitlin Nabar. So forget everything I said about gender. But there's a bunch of people photographing butterflies in Washington, and 2 of them have photographed the buckeye butterfly. So we know it's occasionally comes into Washington. But the very first person to ever see a buckeye in Washington was a Longview resident named Barbara Loudon. She may still be here. She may be with us today. I don't know, Barbara. If you're here, let me know. Dear old friend of mine, butterfly person from way back, who saw a buckeye in Longview in 1953. First record in the state. Now, she didn't get a photograph or a specimen, and so we don't have the data that can verify that record, but I believe she saw it. And so this is going to be one that will surely be shifting into Washington, and more with global warming. So watch for buckeyes. Buckeyes are probably coming, and they've got a history in the Cowlitz Columbia. No, we're not going to have the spectacular pink slug of South America moving this far north. We're going to have to stick with our regular slugs. And we're almost certainly not going to have the pink spotted swallowtail of northern Mexico on the pink bougainvilleas moving this far north. But we don't need to. We've got our own beautiful pink spotted Parnassians laying their eggs on our wild bleeding hearts. And that's enough for me. Thanks for coming today on a tour of the butterflies of the Cowlitz Columbia. Not butterfly nirvana, but not bad. Thanks very much. And now I'll be happy to take any questions if anyone is still here.
All right. Thank you, Bob. That was fascinating.
I want to stop sharing my screen.
I went ahead and stopped it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And we have gotten some questions. Let me see.
You're welcome, Autumn. Thank you.
I think the first one we got was, what makes the pine white the most primitive of whites?
It's a judgment, of course, on the part of evolutionary biologists who study butterflies. Butterflies are used in many, many research systems because they're not that hard to raise sometimes. They have fairly rapid generations. They're spectacular and conspicuous, and you can follow them in the field. And so butterflies are used for a lot of genetics, but also their chromosomes are big, and they're known, and they're just great lab animals. So they're used a lot. In fact, the Rh factor blood disease thing in babies that has been solved by the Rh factor test was first worked out on the genetics of swallowtail butterflies.
Really?
Don't ask me how. So anyway, the pine whites possess factors in the veins of their wings and in the genitalia, which are very conservative to a person who has the cosmology of an evolutionary biologist. To a person with a different creation myth or cosmology, you'll explain these in different ways, and that's fine too. But to a person with the belief system of evolutionary biology, Darwinian interpretation of the world, there are conservative traits, and then there are traits that change fast. Color is easy to change with a few little genetic flicks, but the veins of the wings and the structure of the genitalia and certain other physical qualities change very slowly. And we know this because of the fossil record, even with butterflies. And so it's because of traits like that that the pine white possesses, which it holds in common with some fossil butterflies, that we know that it's, or we judge that it's one of our more primitive butterflies. Butterflies go back at least 50 million years, probably. Butterflies and moths probably go back 150 million years at least. And pine whites may be not that much change from some butterflies that were here 30, 40, 50 million years ago.
Wow. Okay. Here's another one. And I'm going to add to this one a little bit. Wrote, historically, was there milkweed and hence monarch butterflies in the Willamette Valley? And I'm going to add to that because I see a lot of fierce debates going on about people promoting and planting milkweed outside of the traditional range in the hopes of attracting monarchs. What you think about that? So those two.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this could occupy us for the rest of the day. I've already taken your morning, so I know there are more questions. So I'll try to be concise. Very, very complicated stuff with a huge amount of debate. And I've been involved in monarch conservation for a full 50 years. So so I have a little bit to say about it, and I have my opinions, but I'll simply try to be strictly informative and concise. Yes, there has been and remains some milkweed traditionally, that is to say, occurring in nature in the Willamette Valley, but there's not very much of it north of Roseburg. It does get up to Eugene and a little bit up to Salem, and there have been some organizations and individuals who have worked to proliferate the native species. There's only one native milkweed in the Willamette Valley. It's Asclepias speciosa, the showy milkweed, and that's fine. People have been spreading it. Best to use local genetic stock, of course, around preserved and protected areas, as they're protecting the Fender's blue and the Kincaid's lupin in the valley down there. Thank you, Ian. And so there is a certain amount of milkweed down there, and there's a certain amount of monarch breeding as far north as about Salem. North of there, I don't know the old herbarium records for the counties north of Salem. Probably, almost certainly there was. In Washington, I don't think we have herbarium records for Clark and Cowlitz. There are some records in King County, but they're milkweeds that established along the railroad lines, surely from seeds that came in on trains. So I don't think we have herbarium records in Western Washington, but we can assume, thank you, Michael, that's very kind of you to say. We'll ask that question about sharing later. But I think we can assume that during the Hypsotherm, which was a warmer period in the interglacials, that there will have been milkweed probably in Western Washington. We don't know it for sure, but we don't have any historic records of milkweed west of Klickitat County and west of about Natchez on the Yakima River and west of about Methow in the north.
Okay.
And now about the debates over planting milkweed. Well, it's complicated. First of all, as a basic rule of thumb, one should stick to native species. And that doesn't mean native in the state. That means native in your county, native to where you live, not your state, and not a different genome from the area where you are. You can't always get local. So a lot of things are planted and called native, and they came from Okanagan County. That's not native to Cowlitz County, even if the species is. Sometimes restorationists can't do better than that, but it's better to go to Raintree or one of the nurseries that actually has local native stock and use that. Now, as far as planting it in Western Washington, what's the point? There aren't any monarchs here. They're not going to find it. It's very unlikely. The point could be that if one very, very, thank you, Melanie, dear. The point is that if some monarch did happen to find it, and I did have a monarch here once, they've been on Puget Island now and then. Well, if that happened, against the odds, sure, it might lay some eggs. Would they make it back again? Who knows? Would they come back to you again? Almost certainly not. But milkweed's a great nectar plant for all kinds of butterflies and other pollinators. So if you want to plant milkweeds in your garden, have at it. If you want to plant it in a semi-natural habitat, I would urge the native species or the nearest one. It's not going to hurt anything really, but it probably won't work for monarchs if you don't live in the range of migrating monarchs. And now it's probably not going to work anywhere in the Northwest unless things really change, because as I say, the California coastal monarchs have collapsed in the last 2 years. There have been only about 2,000 monarchs counted in all of California on the last two Thanksgiving counts, where they normally get hundreds of thousands going back into the 90s. And it's very, very sad. And there are a lot of hypotheses. There's a big project where they're going to try to raise masses of monarchs and turn them loose. But frankly, I don't know how those monarchs are going to resume the migratory behavior if they're not, it's not chilly enough for them to hibernate on the coast. So I don't know. Stay tuned to all that. But there's not a lot of point in spending a lot of energy on milkweed right now, except if you live in a milkweed prominent area. It's great to plant it for other pollinators and to get it ready in case the monarchs do recover. And I might be all wet. Maybe they'll recover this winter and be back next spring. We did get marginally more monarchs in Washington this year than we did last year, which was almost none. This year, there were a few detected in Washington. And we know this because of David James, Dr. David James of WSU, our great Northwest monarch guru. Has a great website, by the way, or a Facebook page on Northwest monarchs. Check that out if you want. And he records all this stuff. He's optimistic that the migration will restore itself. It's not all dead because we got a few this year. So I very much hope he's correct. Go ahead, buy monarchs, buy milkweed, can't hurt, except don't have giant expectations and be disappointed, but have sober expectation, but high hopes. But do use the native local species. Now,
Absolutely.
as far as planting tropical milkweed in California, that's a giant debate. Some believe that it has contributed to the decline and demise of the migration by keeping, you see, monarchs go into a reproductive diapause, and they don't lay eggs, they don't mate during the migration for the most part. But if there is food plant present in the winter, that alters their chemistry. The gonads develop, they become sexual, they start laying eggs. And so there is a, I think not weak hypothesis that the tropical milkweed proliferation by people wanting to do good has contributed to the demise of the overwintering on the coast. Don't know if that's true or not. But we do know that the monarchs are adapting in large numbers, thousands, I don't know how many thousands, in the Bay Area and on down toward LA too, to city milkweed. And I think it's probably just becoming another urban garden butterfly like the Gulf Fritillary on garden plants. And that happened because of all the planting of passion flower for it. That may move up here. Okay, there we go. Mike Patterson's putting up the milkweed map for the consortium of.
Oh, good.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Mike. Thank you. By the way, do check out the Northwest Monarchs Facebook site. Also, there's a very fine Northwest Butterflies website. Facebook site managed by Linda Capon of Southwestern Oregon for butterfly photographers. And there's also a Pacific Northwest lepidopterist I just had a brain loss. What are they called? Not a Facebook site, but I'll come back to it.
Listserv?
Listserv. Thank you, Listserv. Yeah, that's good. And then the website I really want to tell you about is Caitlin Labar's. Now, let me put a plug in for Kate in my book. Is this showing?
It is, yeah.
Now, my old book, The Butterflies of Cascadia, if you have it or can find it, is still very useful, and it has a lot of stuff in it that we weren't able to preserve in the more concise new book. But the new book is up to date. It has most of what you'll need, all of the species. Will identify all your butterflies for you with fabulous new photographs that we've compiled from a lot of different photographers. And this was co-authored by myself and Caitlin Labar, who is a cartographer who lives in Kelso and is our leading up and coming butterfly researcher in the state, working with the old pros and has-beens like me. And Caitlin is working on a phenomenal system of Western American butterflies, maps, with John Pelham at the Burke Museum. And she also has a splendid website that I urge you to visit called Northwest Butterflies Blogspot. It's not a website, it is a blog.
Okay.
Northwest Butterflies blogspot.
Wonderful.
By the way, I meant to say at the very beginning of my talk that I want, as they always do in Australia, and we should hear more, to really recognize the indigenous peoples whose lands we're occupying and whose habitats we are celebrating, and the original neighbors of the butterflies. And here that will be the Cowlitz and the Wakiakums and the Chinooks and a number of other tribal groups. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank
Are
you
there
for
more
mentioning
questions?
that. Do you want to do another question?
Oh, I'm here as long as anybody is.
Okay. This one from James Adams.
Hi, Jim.
Bob, any feeling, and I may not get the pronunciations correct here. Bob, any feeling on why the taxonomy of Celestrina has resulted in multiple species being named, but the silvery blue Glaucopsyche is still considered one species, Ligdamus, with numerous subspecies across the entire country? I often wondered and thought you might have some feeling about this as well. Just curious about your opinion.
I do have some thoughts. Is this the James Adams who is the editor of the wonderful Lepidopterist News, or a different James Adams?
I don't know. Maybe he'll pipe up.
Okay. Anyway.
He is the editor.
Oh, James, wonderful to have you here, my man. James edits a fabulous butterfly magazine published by the Lepidopterist Society, which I have belonged to since 1959. I urge the Lepidopterist Society to you if you have serious interests in butterflies' moths. By the way, I just saw over my shoulder, and I want to point it out before I answer James' question. My big painting by Bill Howe, the greatest American butterfly painter. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Painting of Mount Rainier with an outbreak of pine whites around it. My zoom background. Okay, James, Celestrina, the azure butterflies, have indeed been split into a bunch of different species. And hold your horses, man. Just got some news from Jonathan and Nick that it ain't over. There's some new taxa coming, and they seem to be extremely well supported by the genomic information. And it's going to solve some big problems we have out here in the West. But the spring azure used to be thought to be one butterfly. And now we have a species that feeds on wild hops. Then we have a species that feeds on cherry galls. And we have a number of other species that were called, what's the term? Hidden species that we were not discerning by traditional means. But now that we're doing a lot of genomic work, a man named Nick Grishin in Texas and a number of other laboratories are looking into the genomes in great depth of so many of our butterflies, and we're coming out and we're discovering they have different evolutionary pasts back at a certain point and have really quite differentiated themselves. And when they are discerned that way, then we go out and we find, oh yes, they have ecological differences as well, but they can be very difficult to discern. Well, I think, James, the reason that the azures have been is because they have been studied a lot by Mr. Wright and Mr. Pavelin and Nick and lots of other people. The Glaucopsyche, wonderful scientific name that means blue soul, which includes not only our common silvery blue all around the country, but also the namesake of the Xerces Society. By the way, people don't know the Xerces Society. Please visit its website, xerces.org. It is our international organization for the conservation of not only butterflies, but for invertebrates in general. Wonderful group, wonderful website. I had the honor to have founded it as a kid in 1971. It's having its 50th anniversary year this year. And it's named for the extinct Xerces blue butterfly, which was the first American butterfly known to have become extinct from human causes. Well, there's quite a project going on down at the Presidio in San Francisco right now, which was the last place the Xerces blue was ever seen alive, became extinct there when the habitat was altered for military reasons. That old military site fort has now become public again, and the habitat has been restored for a lot of organisms on the Presidio, including the food plant of the Xerces Blue. I wrote an essay called Resurrection Ecology, Bring Back the Xerces Blue, in which I suggested bringing back the nearest silvery blue relative that could be determined and was common enough to transplant, and put it down in this new habitat that has been restored and see if we don't have microevolution back towards Xerces. Well, that's actually being undertaken now, along with thinking about some actual genetic manipulation in the laboratory to increase Xerces traits. But that's a lot further and a lot more controversial. But as far as putting in the nearest related silveries, it looks like that's actually going to happen. So that's very cool. But this raises a question, doesn't it, James, that Xerces has gone back and forth to be considered a full species or a subspecies of Xerces. And why hasn't the Glaucopsyche, the silvery blues, why haven't they had the same scrutiny as Celestrina, isn't that a pretty name, the azures, and therefore a number of the so-called hidden species perhaps discerned? Well, guess what, James? It's happening right now. In fact, it was announced in no less a source than the New York Times last month that the Xerces Blue has undergone some genomic research from old pin specimens that they managed to recover enough genetic material from to do the tests. And this was done partly at Harvard with Nomi Pierce, an old colleague of mine at Yale, who became the Hessel Professor of Lepidoptera at Harvard and has had a long distinguished career there, including his including having a MacArthur Fellowship for her work on blue butterflies and their coevolution with ants. Well, Nomi and her colleagues are now doing the genomic work on the Xerces Blue, and they hope to extend it into the silvery blue more. Nick is doing some of the same work in Texas. So we have two different labs looking at it. And James, if you go to that New York Times article, it has the link, or I can send it to you, for the paper it's based on. And guess what? John Pelham read that paper for me, and he said, if you read it carefully enough, the Harvard group is suggesting the genetic difference in the silvery blue cohorts they've looked at is sufficient to justify speciation. So they've not only reestablished, contra the Pelham catalog, the specific status, the full specific status of Xerces in this paper, but they're also suggesting that exactly what you're asking about, that the silvery blue also has hidden species within it. So that's happening, man. Great question. Thank you.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. All right. I think we got time for one more. This one from Dale Olson. Hi, Bob. Where and when in our area can I see a morning cloak? You tempted me with descriptions of chocolate and blueberry ice cream. Thank you for a great program.
Yeah, I always see food, foodie stuff in these butterflies. I've always thought of a fresh one. Now, when you see a beat up morning cloak in the springtime that spent the winter, often they're very pale. And so the edges of the wings are more like skim milk. And the interior is more like milk chocolate. And the blueberries are still there. But a fresh morning cloak, oh man, it really is like dark chocolate, blueberries, and French vanilla. Well, Dale, you're in Cabbageway, and speaking to a wonderful poet, Dale Olson, whose husband is the mayor of Cathlamet, Washington.
Yeah.
And these folks are great butterfly watchers, as well as participants in community in the arts. And I'm happy to say, Dale, that there's a good chance of you seeing morning cloaks along any of our waterways with willows in March, particularly if there's some nectar sources out. There isn't much nectar out in March. But where I found it particularly good to find them is if you can find a homestead with old laurel bushes, laurel hedges that bloom in March and April. And if you can find a big blooming laurel hedge that's anywhere near a watercourse or a wooded area with willows, then you got a good chance finding monarchs. I mean, morning glory. I see them here at my own place some years, not every year. One really good place where I've seen them in the past has been at Brookfield, one of the very last places you can drive on ungated logging roads out of Cabbageway, West Valley, down to the Columbia River, over to Brookfield. That's my patch for the Christmas bird count. So I go there every Christmas time. But Tia and I used to find mourning cloaks right near the end of the road at Brookfield, where the little road pulls up to an old dock by the dredge spoil piles. There's a bunch of willow trees there, and they have in the past hosted mourning cloaks. So you can either look in the late, you can look right now, if we have another sunny patch and warm patch, I'd go out to Brookfield and you might see the brand fresh mourning cloaks getting ready for hibernation. That'd be a good place to look. But even Sacagawea Park in Longview, you could have mourning cloaks, but also around the lakes west of town, the backwaters. If you get off on the safe little pullouts and little paths around there, that'd be a place to look to. And walking around Willow Grove, walk around the willowy parts of Willow Grove. Yeah, the willowy parts of Willow Grove should the island off of Longview should be a great place to look for mourning cloaks, both in the early spring and in the late summer and fall. Valerie Sloan, how nice to hear from you. Do eat your cabbage butterfly worms. You won't even know it. Get the protein.
There you go. I'd love to see a mourning cloak myself.
Faithful
So I'll be out
there. Well, just pick them off and toss them in.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about two different subjects here.
I know.
Cabbage butterflies in the chat and mourning cloaks. Yes, mourning cloaks are the best. Well then the birds are doing the trick for you if you don't see them.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you again, Bob. This was wonderful. I'm itching to get out now and see the world fresh with all this new information.
Hey, Valerie, if you say they eat everything, if you mean the cabbage butterfly larvae, they don't eat anything except crucifers, absolutely nothing. So if you got something eating things other than crucifers, cabbages and broccoli and so on, then you've got different kind of caterpillars. Oh, all crucifers, okay. When you say everything, you mean all crucifers. All right, yes, they do. Just grow more. Grow more for the cabbage whites.
That's right.
I'm sorry, there was one more comment after that I missed.
What was that?
There was one more chat after that I missed.
Oh, let's see. We got a couple of people thanking you.
Oh yeah, just thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Oh, and I
Yeah.
want to say too, let's ask whether or not this will be recorded.
Yes, it is being recorded, and I will get it up onto the library's YouTube channel, and we will share that out. And I'll make sure that you know about it, Bob, so you can share it out too.
Okay, what native flower do I suggest for monarchs in the San Francisco Bay Area? Oh yes, for nectar, you can grow anything for nectar. Liatris ligustatus, wonderful for nectar. If you're still here, Claudia, by all means. No, for nectar, grow anything you want. It's the tropical milkweed problem is that it attracts the adults to lay eggs at a season when they shouldn't be doing so. But I would suggest, if you want to plant milkweed in the Bay Area, I suggest planting narrow-leaved milkweed, Asclepias fascicularis. But for nectar, anything they like is fine. Carols, how do you spell it, Dan? If you're still here, it's Carrols. You'll see it on the roadside. at the intersection between I-5 and Longview. Carroll's Bluffs are located immediately east of I-5 between Kalama on the south and Kelso on the north.
Yeah.
And there's some traffic there. It's not safe to walk in all of it, but there are some areas on the Carroll's Bluffs where you can safely pull your car off and get up against the cliffs. And it's where the seeps come down, where the moisture comes down on the seeps. You get stonecrop. You can even get the little moss elf in there in the springtime, and it's a good butterfly place. Yeah, so Olympic Peninsula has a lot. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm way too late for this, Autumn. If you're still there, you asked Arkansas, the Diana fritillaries. Yes, the most wonderful fritillary, great big blue females, and the males are Halloween orange and black. And Autumn, the place to find those is in the Ozarks. In particular, I've had good luck with them way out in the western Ozarks at Mount Magazine State Park. Great place for Diana fritillaries. Shelley found me funny. That's good. James says Caitlin is awesome. That's true. Caitlin is truly awesome. Book wouldn't be here without her.
Valerie Sloan said, will planting milkweed in Seattle do anything to help eventually? I have so much planted. It would be cool to plant a milkweed pathway up through the states.
Well, Valerie, depends on how long you have to wait. With global warming, I have very little doubt that milkweed will spread north, and the monarchs may too, but then the migratory behavior may completely go away with global warming because it's a winter adaptation.
Right.
On the other hand, monarchs might become a native butterfly all the way up the Puget Trough, as they probably were in the Hypsither. So go ahead and plant. It can't hurt. Stick around and wait and see. And the other thing is that who knows, things can happen faster than we expect. And the other thing, the many other things, but one other thing is, as I said, milkweed is a wonderful nectar plant for a great big array of pollinators. Some of the little butterflies sometimes get their tibia caught on their pollen, their pollinia, and get stuck there and die. Sometimes you'll find a milkweed with all covered with hairstreak butterflies, and they're all dead. So it's a great thing for a collector or a museum biologist, but distressing sometimes to others. But that doesn't happen very often. The swallowtails will love you for planting milkweed. So will the morning cloaks, and so will the skippers, lots of others. So by all means, go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Lovely plants for the garden too.
I love beautiful. The idea of a milkweed and monarch corridor all the way up to Puget Trough. They're not going to hurt anything. There's plenty of other non-native plants. Plant them instead of the Scots broom. Sure.
I think we did have someone ask too if Scotch broom has any benefit for butterflies, or if it's one of those completely unbeneficial plants.
I hope that person is still with us. Interesting question that. Scots broom has been terribly unhelpful for our butterflies in the Puget Trough, especially on the area called the Tenino Prairies, or the Mima Mounds, the mounded prairies. At the Mima Mounds DNR Natural Area Preserve, Heritage Site, Joint Base Lewis McCourt, Scots broom has been one of the biggest problems, and it has to be very, very aggressively fought. There are some areas where Scots broom is said to be providing a certain amount of useful cover for birds, as it does in Britain, where it's native, although gorse is better at that, but an even worse non-native incursive plant. But as far as any direct benefits to butterflies, you know, the little yellow lotus, Lotus corniculatus, the bird's foot trefoil, that has become established in common along a lot of our roadsides, that has the Ackman Blue has adapted to that as a caterpillar host plant, and the skipper is nectar on it. So that's actually become a useful butterfly plant. But the Scots broom, even though it's another yellow a legume, I've had one possible report of silvery blue ovipositing on it, but I haven't had that confirmed. And there's been a little bit of nectaring on it, I think, by pale tiger swallowtails, but not enough to really call it much of a butterfly benefit. Unlike introduced plants like the green ash tree, which is excuse me, abundant now in as a shade tree in almost every western arid town from Calgary to Mexico City. The green ash tree has become a fabulous caterpillar host plant for the two-tailed tiger swallowtail, which is probably a great deal more widespread and abundant than it ever was in pre-contact times. There are some other introduced non-native plants that have proven to be great boons to native butterflies, particularly in the absence of their native plants. This is why, even though we do need to fight the so-called invasive plants very hard in some places, and I do, you also have to be careful to assess what the native butterflies are using and other pollinators before you get rid of the non-natives, unless you have a plan to replace them right away with something that you know they'll use. And believe me, a number of the recommended lists of plants to replace them with are risible. They're absurd in their usabilities. For example, one of the native plants groups suggested replacing butterfly bush with elderberry. Butterfly bush is the single greatest butterfly attractant in human history. That's why people plant it. Yes, it's a listed noxious weed. Yes, it is a dangerous, adventitious plant on certain waterways, such as the Skagit and the Elwha, that both Indian and non-Indian groups have had to fight to get rid of on the rivers. But people will not stop using it because it's the best butterfly attractant. Happily, a whole research group at Oregon State University now is researching the new sterile races of, or cultivars of Buddleia that have been developed to determine whether they also produce good nectar and attractability. I very much hope so. And then we can begin to replace all of the non-native Buddleia in our gardens with the sterile types. But to replace them with elderberry is the one plant, the one big flowering plant in our woods that I have never seen a single butterfly nectar on. And to replace the best butterfly nectar plant of all with it? No, you see, you've got to really study these things. And before you get rid of a non-native plant that the butterflies are using, make sure you got something they aren't using. I discovered just this season that 4 of our biggest, most beautiful skipper butterflies in Washington are all using the what I call the pink popsicle plant. It's the pink wild sweet pea, which is a highly adventitious weed along eastern Washington and some western Washington roadsides. I don't know if it's considered a real problem or not. If it's been listed as a noxious weed, I'm not sure, but it certainly is covering a lot of ground. And I've learned that a lot of butterflies nectar on it, and I guess 3 of our big skippers use it as a caterpillar host plant too. So you wouldn't want to wipe it out of a place where those butterflies occur unless you're going to provide an alternative host plant. And that's a difficult idea for a lot of native plants people to absorb. But you can do
Very
some
difficult
damage by getting rid of non-natives that the locals have adapted to, unless you're ready to replace them right away with a suitable and acceptable alternative.
I think I've just seen one last question pop up here. It says, "Hi, Bob. What was the name of the skipper you spoke of in regards to climate change?"
Oh, it's called the sachem, Sachem. Some people say sachem, some say sachem, but it's an Algonquin Indian word
Oh,
that that means chief in the Algonquin, or so I am informed.
hmm.
And the Native Americans who in that area, in the Appalachian area, still use that term, sachem, I believe. And I think it was Samuel Scudder, great early New England lepidopterist, who conferred a lot of our common names upon butterflies. He gave a lot of Indian names
Hmm.
to our butterflies, including one who has the common name Indian skipper. There's one called Atoi, there's one called Pahaska, there's one called Arapaho, there's one called Dakota, and Pocahontas,
Hmm.
butterfly named Pocahontas. Yes, we have a number of our American butterfly species skippers are named for Native American names
Hmm.
that were known in the 19th century. And I believe it was he who gave the common name sachem. I'm talking about the scientific names now, but the common names are often the same for those butterflies. And with the sachem, its scientific name is different. Its scientific name is Atelopedes campestris. Campestris is Latin for of the field,
Hmm.
pasture or field. So it's a field butterfly, and it feeds on grasses. And in some areas, it's so common that it's considered a pasture pest, but that's certainly not the case anywhere it occurs in the Northwest. But it's a little bit bigger than our woodland skippers. It has a great big black patch on the forewing. The
Hmm.
female is considerably bigger with a glassy spot on her forewing. So you can tell them pretty easily from the woodland skipper. And that's what happened for me. I was looking for it all along the borders. It's a lot of fun to find a new state butterfly, called a state record, a butterfly that hasn't been found in the state before. And I've been lucky to find 6 of them. And this one I was really searching for along the borders because a friend of mine had found it finally in Portland, first record in Portland.
Hmm.
I said, okay, it's gonna be crossing the Columbia, because I knew it was moving north in the valley. And my late wife Tia had some business near the Vancouver Mall. She was in a building. I was sitting outside in the car, and there was wasn't planted as a butterfly garden really, but it was serving as such out in front. And there were a number of woodland skippers, a couple other things, whites, I think. And then I saw, wow, that skipper looks a little bit big. And I jumped out and went down and looked, and it was in fact a sachem. And it was the very first sachem in Washington State recorded. I had to make a little net on site out of a piece of wire that I got from a nearby electrician, and a little almond bag, little cotton almond bag, little tiny net to catch the butterfly so I could examine it and make absolutely sure that I was correct. That butterfly has now spread quite a bit in Tri-Cities area and along the gorge, and it will be moving into Cowlitz County. And if anybody's still listening, I'm going on one more butterfly trip this summer. Well, it's still summer for 3 days, so I guess it'll be early
That's right.
autumn. Right around the end of the month. I'm going down to Asotin County, the southeasternmost very corner of the state, which is where back in 1975, I found the only record ever of a little tiny migratory butterfly called the dainty sulfur. Really cute little tiny thing. Found it there in 75. It migrates north and then backs off. Never been found in Washington before or since. But I'm going down there because there's a lot of hackberry trees. There's a butterfly that feeds on hackberry. It's never been found in Washington, except that there are 2 sightings reported for it. And I'm going to go down there for my 6th time, my 6th expedition, to try to find it at the end of this butterfly season.
Wow. Well, I hope you find it. That sounds like a fantastic trip.
It's always a good trip, whether or not I find it. Last time I was wading in the stream nearby in Joseph Creek, and I was wading out and I noticed a little snake wading beside me, slithering right beside my foot. Thought it was a garter, stepped out onto a flat rock. The snake came out and basked right by my foot, and it was a little rattlesnake.
Oh, wow.
So we just stood there together until it decided to go.
Wow. Wow.
Always have fun there, whether or not I find the hackberry butterfly. Maybe this time I'll really find it.
Yeah.
That would be my 7th state record.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you again for doing this.
Thank you.
It's been a joy as always.
My pleasure, so much, and I thank you so much for doing the seed library.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm excited to get out and see some butterflies. You'll be able to find me on Carroll's Bluff, no doubt, in the spring and early summer. So
yeah, Carroll's Bluff is a great place to go.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you all.
And thank you to the Longview Library Foundation for supporting these talks. And get out there and notice some butterflies. All right. See you later, Bob.
See you later.